I feel compelled today to speak on the state of the world. There's so many people who are afraid and in crisis and mostly just afraid. It's really interesting having a professional page, being in the spiritual community, being in the healing community. I actually see comments and thoughts from people on both sides of the spectrum, people who think that the world is moving in a better direction, and then people who are really feeling afraid and like everything's falling apart. This post is, or this recording is primarily speaking to the latter group, but really I just want to share my perspective on a bigger picture and what I see happening. And I know there's other people in the consciousness community, in the spiritual community, who have this viewpoint as well. But for those who are feeling afraid, I want to share this perspective in the hopes that it can provide you with some hope and perhaps a different way of approaching what is happening right now. I myself have always been a big picture person. And when I'm able to see the big picture, understand the big picture, first of all, it helps me to be able to make decisions on what actions to take. When I see the big picture, then the actions become very clear. And then also, when I'm able to see the big picture, it also provides context, and it makes things feel less scary. So I'm going to share my view. It's really more than a view. It feels like a deep knowing. So whenever I share information, I try to be clear about where the information is coming from. Sometimes it's professional opinion based on years of experience doing something in my area of profession. Sometimes it's my own just inner knowing and guidance, my intuition, in which case I'll share it's intuitive. And sometimes it's a knowing, and those knowings, it's just something, it's like information I receive and I just know it to be true in my gut. And those are when I have those knowings, they've always come to fruition. They've always been true. And so I've learned to just follow and trust those. It's also true that others, I think I may have mentioned this already, this is not just coming from me. I've heard other people speak to this, and there's people who track astrology and talk about it from an astrological standpoint, people who follow history and can see the patterns in terms of history. The point is that we are in a certain pattern right now, and you can see it from a number of different perspectives. For me, it's a deep knowing, just by connecting with the consciousness, and for others, they have other systems in which they're able to see the same pattern. So here's the pattern that I see us to be in right now. We are changing eras. We have been in an era for a long time. And because it's been multiple generations, it can feel like, well, this is how it's always been, or it's been this way. These certain things are true. These things are inevitably true. The reality is that we've been in a certain era, and part of that era has been, or part of the characteristics, some of the characteristics of that era, right, has been oppression, oppression of feminine energy. I'm going to talk about feminine energy in a different recording, in a different episode. So I don't want to spend too much time talking about how I'm using that phrase right now. So literally the oppression of women, but also the oppression of feminine energy, and the way in which we have governed ourselves and made decisions and ruled has followed a certain structure. Some people may call it patriarchal. I think it all depends on how you define words, but at any rate, the important part is that we are now shifting. We're shifting into a new era. Part of that new era is feminine energy is rising. And I'm not even talking about like women empowerment. I'm talking about all the aspects of what is feminine energy. And again, I'll talk about that in another post. And the rising of feminine energy is not about the oppression of masculine energy, which I'll also talk about in another recording, right? unfortunately, that's what's happening in the world right now. And that's something I'm very passionate about, and we'll address separately. But I just want to stay big picture here for a minute. So, so the feminine energy is rising and coming into its true form and true nature. And, um, and that is going to create this whole new era, this whole new way of being. And I've said this multiple times that for in personal conversations of what I see in our younger generation, so many people talk about, they're afraid of our world because our younger generations are whatever, not competent or not motivated or whatever else. And I don't see that at all. I say younger generations, I'm talking like, maybe our current like 20-year-olds and younger, right? So those that are still children, when they are governing the world is going to look completely different. And perhaps even their children might even, might be a couple of generations out yet. But I think our current children up to young adults, when they are governing the world, they're going to be the beginning of things looking completely different. And I mean that on a massive scale. The way we use money is going to look different, whether it's e-currency or something else. I don't know. But I know that it's going to be different from the way that money is used and expressed today. And money runs everything, whether we like it or not. That's a fact. So when money changes, business changes. When business changes, our corporations, the way that we run business is going to change. And businesses are behind everything. Businesses are behind money. They're behind our economy. They're behind our politics, right? So then as that changes, the way we govern changes. The way we do health changes, the way we interact with each other. And the way that I see this future is actually incredibly beautiful, full of compassion and collaboration, and also individualism. It's like this combination. It's this like amazing, beautiful combination of individualism and collaborations, unlike anything that we have seen in our history, at least in our recorded history. I know that is the outcome, or at least I'm going to say a potential outcome of where we're headed. The beautiful part, I really believe that's what we are creating and what will be created. And I think the path in which we take to get there is kind of what's in question right now. So the point is that we are currently moving from one era into another era. And by definition, when things change, when you're in that transition space, in that beginning part of a new era, there's going to be chaos. There is no way to avoid it. Look at any type of creation in the universe, and you will see that there is pain and chaos right before it, right? Even if we look at something as simple and straightforward as childbirth, right? The baby's incubating, and that may be beautiful and maybe not, depending on the person, right? But childbirth itself is painful and messy. It's difficult for the baby, I believe, just the whole experience of moving through the birth canal. It can be challenging for the mother as well, depending on all kinds of different factors. But there is pain involved necessarily, and there is and pain and messiness, right? There's no way to avoid it. That's where we are right now. We're in the birth canal. And as we're moving into a new era, by necessity, systems have to be dismantled. And that does not feel good. And change, as humans, we are literally designed or developed to resist change. If you study, I remember from my animal biology, my animal population classes, animal ecology classes, right? That animals will only instigate change. They will only move to a new home or change their food or make a change in their life when their survival is threatened. It is literally in our DNA, in our conditioning, in our imprinting to resist change unless we absolutely have to change. So that's why anytime there's change, it feels scary. It feels wrong and bad and all those things. Anyone who's gone through a major change in their life is going to understand that, right? And the reason, by the way, that people stay stuck in relationships that they don't like, in jobs that they don't like, people live, flat lives of just mediocrity because change is scary. And by the way, I'm not sure if I'm going to speak to this on this episode or on another episode, but what we need right now is for everybody to move out of mediocrity. So if you're living in mediocrity, please reach out to me. If you're living in mediocrity and you don't want to be, reach out to me, because what we need right now is people to step into their missions, into the reason that you're here, because we are going through this change and we get to choose right now which timeline we're going to go on. Are we going to create a timeline that moves towards that beautiful future that I can see? That beautiful future of collaboration and connection with our ancient wisdom, and individualism combined with collaboration that makes this incredible, beautiful place to live. Are we going to go down that timeline, or are we going to go into darkness? Are we going to go back into a dark ages type of era? We are at choice right now because we are in transition. And what's going to get us to that beautiful place is people stepping into their mission. We need people to stop being afraid of speaking your truth, which is one of the reasons I decided to record this and other episodes that I'm recording that you'll be getting, because we need people to speak their truths. So many people that I talk to when I open up share with me what their truths are. And it's amazing to me how aligned we are. And then they're like, oh, but I'm afraid to say this to anybody else. And that's what's causing the problems. That's what's causing the problems in our world, is people not speaking up, people being afraid. I'm going to do another episode about that, but I really want to stay focused on I'm going to keep going on this. People are afraid. They're afraid to speak up. They're afraid to live who they are. Because they're afraid of persecution, or they're afraid of loss of income. And the truth is, what we need right now is for people to step up, because we're at a choice point where we get to decide what this future looks like, because we are in chaos. We are in a necessary chaos. We are currently at the beginning of a dismantling of systems. I hope I remember to come back to that, because I feel that I want to share another aspect of this. Okay. So why are people afraid to speak their truth right now? Because we are living in a world of divisiveness. And the reason that I'm speaking up is because I just cannot stand by anymore and watch the freaking divisiveness that's happening across the planet. And the thing is, we've watched this happen before, and now we're watching it happen again. And the first time it happened, I didn't say anything. And honestly, there's a part of me that's like, I'm just one person. What does it matter if I say something, right? Like, I can't possibly create any difference or change by speaking up. And that's the thinking that's keeping us stuck, and that's going to keep us in going down the path of darkness instead of creating a future that we want. So the first time, well, it's happened many times, but the time in recent history that it happened, that I spoke to about on Facebook, that got a bunch of responses, was during the pandemic. Okay, so I'm going to speak to that for a minute, and then I'm going to speak to the similarities I see between what was happening during the pandemic and what's happening now, and the relation to where we're going. And I really invite you, if you're listening to this, to listen with an open heart, because I'm going to start talking about vaccines, and I'm going to start talking about politics. And I'm not here to be, pro, or, for or against vaccines, or for and against a certain administrations, or for and against a certain political party. I don't frankly give a shit about whether you're a pro-vaccine or anti-vaccine. That's not the point. Okay. So I really, really, if you continue listening to this, I want you to listen for the message that I'm trying to share, which is what's so important. And it's not about being pro or for vaccine. So during the pandemic, right, what happened, it was so interesting for me to observe what occurred during the pandemic, and especially what's now coming out. The reason it's safe for me to, I feel safe to speak on this now, is because what's coming out now and people's attitudes have shifted. But what I'm seeing is a repeat of what happened to the pandemic, and I just cannot take that, cannot stand it. And I can't believe that others are willing to let this happen again. How many times are we going to let this happen? Right? So what happened during the pandemic? Very early on in the pandemic, we started getting all these messages about how you have to be vaccinated, how you have to isolate, how you have to wear masks. Now, very early on, like, so this all happened March, I think it was March 20th, right? The end of March. At least I think that was the day that we were sent home. At any rate, March of 2020. I remember pretty early on, maybe, I don't know, 3 weeks in or something like that, I started researching, looking into whatever I could find about what was the best way to keep my family safe. So at this point, it wasn't even about being vaccinated or wearing masks or anything. This was back in the days where we were getting different messages, every single day from the government and other institutions that were managing this information. And so I started looking into this, right? Like what type. So my background is as a biologist, and so I love research studies. I understand how to read and interpret research studies. And so I started looking for these, when have we used masking? So not even related to this vaccine. When is masking effective? When is it not effective? What type of vaccine is this? What kind of virus is this? What kind of vaccine is this? And I started doing my own research. And then what happened is we started getting messages from the institutions that were telling us things that were contrary to the research that I had found. And I was like, wait a minute, what? We started getting information that was contrary to the research that I had found, research by the same institutions. Now, here's where everything changed for me. People started telling me to mask. People started telling me to get the vaccine. And I was like, I'm not sure about that because I read the study. Let me show it to you. Couldn't find it. A few weeks after I had done my original research that I did at the very early stages of the pandemic, a few weeks later, I could no longer find those studies. The studies that said that masking was not effective. The studies that showed why this type of vaccine, the mRNA vaccine, why, the background of it, how it had not yet been studied, what the problems were, potential problems, etc. I could no longer find those research studies. And in that moment, everything changed for me. And in that moment, I was like, I no longer believe any of the stuff that's being put out there because it's not, they're telling us it's evidence-based when it's not. And I'm not going to listen to somebody who is lying to me. So a phrase that I say, and I'm only going to talk about this a little bit here, is that all I need to know, I learned from a narcissist. So I'm honestly super grateful of all my experience with narcissistic trauma and healing from narcissistic trauma, and that I really understand on a very deep level what that looks like, both the insidiousness of narcissistic trauma and also effective strategies to navigate it and effective strategies to heal from it. All of those things are serving me really well now. And I'm not going to call what's happening narcissism. We can get into a debate about whether certain people are or are not. It doesn't matter. What matters is the tactics. The tactics are similar: emotional manipulation, fear, and gaslighting. That's what happened during the pandemic: emotional manipulation, fear, and gaslighting. And those tactics were being used to force people into behaviors that were actually not in their best interest. Sounds like my 16-year marriage. So I was very tuned into this, and I was like, nope, I'm going to hold on to what I know to be true. And I'm going to take actions. Of course, I'm going to take actions to keep myself safe, my family safe, the people I interact with, to the best of my ability. But I'm not going to be bullied into believing or doing things just because the institution is telling me. Now, here's what's really important is that now things are starting, and also, by the way, I did research on the adverse effects. And when I say research, I mean, I went to the database that is kept. There's a database that is kept where you can look up what the adverse effects were of different people. Of course, these are only reported effects. We know not everything was reported, right? Now, there's research coming out from Yale and other recognized, like qualified institutions that are talking about how the vaccine may be causing really adverse effects and long-term effects to people. My doctor has said how angry he is that they were lied to, right? The isolation that was created during the pandemic has long-term effects that we probably won't even understand for 20, 30 years fully. We're still dealing with the consequences of the isolation, right? Now, here's the part that's really, really important. If I've already lost you, and you're not only listening, it doesn't matter. Here's the part that's really important, right? People like myself who saw the lies, saw the manipulation, and I chose to not get vaccinated. And I chose for my kids to not get vaccinated when they were under 18. Oh, where was I? Okay, so I chose to not get vaccinated. I almost never spoke up about this because those who spoke up against the vaccine or against isolation or against wearing masks were persecuted. Persecuted. We were called murderers. You are killing your friends and your neighbors by not getting vaccinated. That's not scientifically accurate, by the way. Right? We were called murderers. We were called, people lost their jobs. People lost their friends and their families. Now, there's all kinds of things happening right now where people are like, they're coming for us, right? This happened during the pandemic, and people, like, I don't know if people don't see it or just don't talk about it. And now I'm starting to feel safe talking about it because now, first of all, the focus has shifted away from that. There's a lot more people who aren't getting vaccinated, aren't getting boosters. There's a lot more evidence being released now about potential adverse effects of the vaccines. And so there's a little bit more looseness around that, or a little bit more openness around that. But the part, again, this is not about being vaccinated or not being vaccinated. The part that's really important is the manipulation by the institutions, the fear, the gaslighting, and the blatant manipulation that the majority of people bought into, to the point that they were calling their friends and family members murderers and disconnecting from them, creating more divisiveness and more isolation. It was absolute madness. And it's happening again. That is the part that my heart just cannot take, and why I'm recording this for anyone who's willing to listen. And hopefully at the end, I'll provide some thoughts and solutions and next steps. So hang tight if that's what you're here for. Whew. All right. So I'm in the US. I know I have international people that listen internationally. But most people in the world are aware of what's happening with the elections with the election in the US and the new administration, and then all the changes that are happening, that administration is at least attempting to make and making. And similar things actually are happening in other parts of the world. Like, got a message this morning from a client in Germany who is feeling, who shared some fear and stress around the elections in Germany. When I asked what was happening, they shared that very similar things to what is happening in the US in terms of policies, policies against immigration, policies against LGBTQ, potentially against women, against minorities, against diversity, all those things. Okay. I'm not going to be talking about pro or for the administration. That's not the point. The point is that, once again, what I'm seeing in media, in the news, and in people that I talk to is this unbelievable divisiveness where we can't even have a conversation with somebody who, if we're for the administration, we cannot speak. If we're against the administration, we cannot speak to somebody who's for the administration. We believe that anyone who's for the administration is absolutely evil, misogynistic, hated, bigoted, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what I'm seeing in the news and in the media is exasperation of this divisiveness. So I see things that pop up on my posts where somebody posts like, "Oh my God, the administration is doing X, Y, and Z." And it's like, women are losing their rights. And I'm like, oh, that sounds terrible. Let me go look into that and see if there's some action I can take, right? Remember I talked about when we understand the meta, we can take actions. So I'm going to talk about that at the end. I see these terrible things posted. I see something terrible posted, and I'm like, wow, that's terrible. Let me go look into it. So far, everything that I have looked into has not been true. Everything that I've seen posted that I have been like, this is terrible, let me look into it, it has not been true. And when I call out the person, when I call it out, when I say, hey, I've researched this is what I found, they're like, oh, okay, well, so my original post or my original statement wasn't true, but nevertheless, it's still true that whatever, women are losing their rights. It's still true that people believe, what? You can see that the information you shared is not true, and yet you will still stand by the sentiment behind it, which is what happened in the pandemic. And it's causing divisiveness and hatred for our fellow human being. Now, I don't want to minimize the fact that things are changing, right? There are things that are true and valid that are happening. I understand that people are scared, just like people were scared during the pandemic. I understand that there are people whose lives are likely to be directly affected by the changes that are happening. I'm not trying to minimize that. And I am going to speak to that in a moment as well. But the part that I really wanted to get across first is this misinformation. I'm going to use the narcissism lens for a minute, right? Gaslighting that's being put out there for the sole purpose of inciting fear and panic and manipulating people to act in a certain way. Information, misinformation, gaslighting being put out there with the sole purpose of inciting fear and panic and allowing and to manipulate people to act in certain ways. And now again, like, I understand fear is one of the most motivating emotions. Fear and anger, incredibly motivating. And again, going back to my experience with narcissistic trauma, and this is what I tell clients all the time, is what happens with somebody with NPD is that they create fear and they create doubt and they create confusion. And so clients will come to me, they're like, oh my God, I'm going to lose my kids. Oh my God, I'm going to lose my home. Oh my God, I'm going to, lose my job because I'm being smear campaigned. Now, are those fears real? Of course, there's a possibility. In the realm of possibility, it's possible that their narcissistic ex may impact the custody they have of their children. It's possible. And it's that possibility that keeps them in fear. And it's that fear that keeps them reactive. And then that reactiveness keeps them in that fight or flight. And now they're spinning, and they're completely at the whim of the narcissist. And it's why they never win, quote unquote, win. I know almost no one who's won in court against a narcissist. And they'll come back to me years later, tens and hundreds of $1,000s spent in court. And they're like, oh my God, nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. Meaning they didn't lose custody. They also didn't win custody, right? Nothing has fucking changed. You know how you create change when you're dealing with a narcissist? You fucking step out of the ring. You stop believing all of the things that they're telling you. You look for what's actually true in your experience and you take action based on that truth. That's how you break out of narcissistic trauma if you're in it. And it's that same skill set that we need to implement now. Look for what is true. For the love of God, please, for the sake of humanity, literally for the sake of humanity, we need everyone to stop believing everything that's put in front of them, to understand the gaslighting, to really, truly look for what is true. And then if what is true is problematic, you take action. This is how I coach my clients again, right? So we look for what's true. Okay, are they actually taking custody? Are they actually taking steps to take custody? No. Cool. Go about your life. Be in integrity. Document things that are happening that are not okay. At some point, if you end up going to court, so if it becomes true, you are then prepared to fight what is in front of you. So it's not that I tell my clients that are dealing with narcissistic people in their lives to not go to court, but we mostly get out of the ring. Stay focused on your own life, and then take action on what is true. So for people that are feeling really scared by what's happening in the US or what's happening in the world, those are the steps that I would recommend for you. First, get your body out of fight or flight. The very first thing that I do with clients dealing with narcissistic trauma is talk about nervous system regulation through breath work, through the practice of presence, breath work, the practice of presence, sometimes guided meditations. You need to calm your nervous system and bring yourself back into what is true. What is true for you right now in your reality? I know we have a desire, we have a compassion to be compassionate for everything that's happening around the world, and that's what's causing a lot of people to be very overwhelmed. Breath work, practice of presence, guided meditations to bring yourself into regulation and into your reality and what is true in your reality right now. And then if there is something in your reality right now that needs to be addressed, that's a threat to you or your loved ones, then take action on that specific threat. That's how you navigate this. Okay, so I want to move meta again because I was talking about viruses and the pandemic and the change in administration and the chaos in our world. But I wanted to give you some tips on how to navigate this if you're living in fear. Okay. So what's really the parallels that I'm seeing, right? So in the pandemic, fear and gaslighting used to incite fear and manipulate people into certain behaviors. The same thing is happening now, certainly in the US with this change in administration. And it's happening on both sides. Again, this is not for or against the administration, right? Some people think our new president is the savior. Some people think he's the devil. He can't be both. Maybe he is both, right? He's probably something in between. Like most humans, he's probably something in between. But the problem is that People really are have their heels ground into their belief, into what is true for them. They admit, he's the devil or he's the savior. They're really ground into that. And the problem is that what I'm seeing is that most people are not able to listen with open hearts and open minds, to recognize that when somebody is responding a certain way, it's because they're afraid. They're afraid for their livelihood. They're afraid for their freedoms. They're afraid for their rights. They're afraid for their loved ones. Those fears may or may not be true. Like I just said, look at what's true, right? They may or may not be true. But what is true is that person's fear. And if we can just take a moment to be present and to be compassionate, that's our way through this. That is our way through to creating a future that's actually something that we all want to live in. A future that we all actually want to live in. The way that we get there is by pausing. Those steps I just mentioned, coming into presence, managing your nervous system, coming into presence, and listening to your fellow human being with compassion. You don't have to agree. You don't have to even understand. But look at what's true for them. Look at what's alive for them. What's alive for them is fear. This is why during the pandemic I did mask, out of compassion for people who were afraid if I didn't. Okay, I don't believe it's helping you, but I see that it's causing you fear. And it's not a big deal for me to put on a mask. So I'm going to do that. So unity, recognizing that we're all human beings and showing some compassion and not allowing the institutions to manipulate you through fear and gaslighting. I want to go back to where I started. We are in a transition. We're moving from one era to another. Whenever something new is created, so this beautiful future that I see as a possibility for us is waiting for us at the other end. This beautiful future that's a possibility for us. Right now, we are transitioning from one era to another. So what does that mean? By definition, there has to be chaos when something new is being created. We see it around us all the time. In my early days as an ecologist, I worked as a wildland firefighter in California, and I also was involved with prescribed burns. So prescribed burns are burns that are set intentionally in order to manage, usually to manage vegetation, so that when wildfires do happen, they're not so large. Another reason we use prescribed burns is because there are certain habitats that only exist after fire. So living in California for 20 years, and there's always wildfires going on, and most people, when they are near a wildfire, there's a lot of fear and a lot of sadness. And so many times I would hear people say, "Oh my gosh, look at the devastation." And it always took me by surprise, because as an ecologist, I would look at the wildfire and I'd be like, "Wow, look at the beauty that's going to come." That's what I saw. Because you know what happens after a wildfire? An unbelievable bloom of wildflowers. A new ecosystem is created, a transitional ecosystem that provides homes to endemic species. In other words, species that only exist in that particular ecosystem. It's amazing. It's beautiful to watch. As someone who's had the opportunity to revisit burn sites over the course of like 5 years, right? And of course, then even more, but even over the course of 5 years, to see how much changes and to see how different homes are created for different plants and different animals. And wildfire is a necessary part of the California ecosystem. The ecosystem will not survive. The ecosystem that exists today, I should say, will not survive without wildfires. Creation comes after destruction. Now, having said that, that's not without compassion, right? Of course, there's compassion for homes that are lost, for human homes, but even animal homes, right? Trees that are burnt, and nests and homes and dens, and of course, it's devastating to watch. And of course, there's compassion and sadness for the loss, and there's a need to grieve loss. So I don't want to minimize that at all. But it's looking at it from this perspective of after chaos comes creation. After chaos comes creation. Right now, we are in a time of chaos by necessity. One era is ending, a new era is starting. In between the two is destruction. I personally believe that's what we're seeing right now in our political systems. Our systems are being torn down, for better or for worse. And they need to be torn down in order to make space for something new, just like a wildfire. I literally see it the exact same way. And I see it the exact same way in the sense of anyone living in the wildfire, it's scary, and they're losing homes, and there's grief, and there's destruction. And we need to be compassionate through that process. But if you can recognize that there's something coming out of it at the other end, that this is part of a necessary process, just like going through the birth canal. If you're able to see that and be like, okay, this fucking sucks. This fucking sucks. And I know that on the other end is something beautiful. And so the only way out is through. Y'all, we can't avoid this. The train has left the station. Okay. So that's another thing that makes me a little crazy when I see people just putting out memes on media that aren't helpful, right? And just very upset. It's like, y'all, the train has left the station. The train is going to crash. I already know that. I think a lot of people know that the train is crashing. You can stay on the train and crash with it, or you can jump off and start creating a different reality over here. That's what I'm trying to do. Is I'm over here creating a different reality, or contributing to creating the reality that's going to exist after the train crashes. Things are in motion to step into this new era, and we're in the midst of chaos. I believe that the way through the chaos, with the most ease and with the greatest potential to create something beautiful on the other side, is through unity. And by unity, what I mean is unity within yourself, coming into wholeness, recognizing when you're being triggered, recognizing when you're in fear and in fight or flight, calming your nervous system and coming into wholeness within yourself. And then recognizing we are all human beings and coming into a place of compassion for your fellow human being. By unity, I don't mean that we have to all agree and be on the same page. Diversity is the beauty of the world. If you look around, like, again, ecosystems, I mean, right? Like, there are ecosystems that cannot coexist because they need completely different things. Our world is the same way, and human beings are the same way, and that's what makes it so beautiful. The way through this chaos is through unity, and unity is listening with open hearts, listening with open minds, supporting people through their fear, understanding that they are in fear, moving out of your own fear, right? Moving out of your own fear so that you can take action based on what is true. When we take action based on what is not true, based on fear and based on gaslighting, that's when we get stuck. Just like with narcissistic trauma. And I think this is why I'm so passionate about it, because I've seen this happen over and over and over again. When people are stuck in fear and they're allowing the fear and the gaslighting to manipulate their actions, they get stuck. And their health fades, their money goes down the drain, they lose relationships with friends, they lose relationships with their children. The only way to get through to get out of the chaos and create something beautiful is to move into wholeness within yourself, to move out of fear and to recognize what's true and to take action based on what is true. So what I want to summarize what I just shared, right? So the big picture things is that on a meta level, we're moving from one era into another era. We are currently in the birth canal. We are currently in chaos and destruction, and it doesn't feel good. And I understand that. And because it doesn't feel good, people are in fear, people are in fight or flight. And that fight or flight is causing divisiveness. And our institutions are feeding that divisiveness and trying to manipulate us into divisiveness. Because when we are divided, we cannot create. Classic narcissistic tactic. When you are in fear, you cannot create. So let's come into unity. Let's move out of that divisiveness. Let's show some compassion and love for our fellow human being, so that by taking action on what is true, we can create a beautiful outcome on the other side, instead of staying in chaos and darkness longer than we need to, or even worse, potentially creating a timeline that goes into a dark age.